Garrison walked into the board meeting with his tie already straightened, and his acceptance speech folded in the breast pocket of his blazer. He had waited 9 years for this moment. His father was stepping down. Everyone in that room, every shareholder, every executive, every camera from the 2 business journals that had been invited, expected Lionel Hargrove to hand Hargrove Development Group to his only son. Even Garrison had stopped pretending otherwise. When Lionel took the microphone, his hands shook slightly from the tremors that had started after his heart surgery 2 years before. But his voice was clear. He looked out at the room, past the front row where Garrison sat, and found a face several rows back. "The person I have chosen to lead this company," Lionel said, "is Meredith." The room broke open. Garrison didn't move. He sat with his hands flat on his thighs, and his speech folded neatly inside his pocket, listening to 300 people applaud the woman he had spent the last 6 years treating like a housekeeper with a business card. Meredith sat very still in her seat, both hands dropped to her stomach, where a small, barely visible curve had formed beneath her blazer. She was 11 weeks pregnant, and only Lionel knew. Garrison turned to look at her. She didn't look back at him. That was the moment something in him cracked open, not because his father had chosen his wife, but because his wife hadn't looked surprised. She had known. And she had said nothing. He unfolded his speech in his lap, looked at it for 1 second, then tore it clean in half. Meredith had grown up in a group home in southeast Dallas. She had never known her mother. She'd been left at a fire station when she was 3 days old, wrapped in a sweatshirt, with a name written in permanent marker on a piece of masking tape. Meredith. That was all she had from whoever had put her there. She grew up understanding early that no one was going to arrive and fix things, so she fixed them herself. At 14, she won a merit scholarship through the Hargrove Foundation, a program Lionel had started to support students from underserved communities pursuing careers in design and construction. Meredith received the award at a ceremony in a downtown hotel ballroom. When her name was called, she walked to the stage in a dress she had borrowed from her group home's donation closet. The applause was polite and brief. When she reached the podium, she looked out at the crowd, and something about all those unfamiliar faces made her chest close. She stood there trying not to cry and losing. A boy from one of the front row tables pressed a folded cocktail napkin into her hand as she stepped off the stage. "You're going to smear it if you rub your eyes," he said. "Use that instead." She did. The boy was Garrison Hargrove. He was 16 and had attended approximately 12 of these ceremonies and found them uniformly dull. He forgot about the napkin before the car ride home was over. Meredith never forgot it. She pressed it flat, kept it in the small wooden box where she stored the few things that were only hers, and carried it with her when she aged out of the group home at 18. By then, she had already been accepted to Texas A&M on a full scholarship. She graduated at the top of her urban planning and development program. She applied to Hargrove Development, passed 4 rounds of interviews, and spent the next 4 years proving she could run a project from the ground up before anyone asked her to. When Lionel's executive vice president retired, Meredith was the person 2 department heads independently recommended. Garrison, by that point, had noticed her. He told her on their 3rd date that he had always believed in her. He told her she was the most capable person he had ever met. He made her feel, for the first time in her adult life, that being seen was possible. She said yes when he asked her to marry him. She said yes for more reasons than one, and she knew it even then. She had loved him since the night he held out a napkin to a girl who was crying in front of strangers. She had loved the version of him she believed was still there. She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. Phyllis Hargrove did not hide her feelings about the marriage. She had been perfectly pleasant to Meredith during the courtship, in the careful way that people are pleasant when they are waiting for something to go away on its own. When it became clear the marriage was actually happening, she stopped pretending. "I want you to understand something," Phyllis said to Meredith 2 weeks before the wedding, in the kitchen of the Hargrove estate, in a tone she might use to explain recycling procedures to a new housekeeper. "My husband has a generous heart, sometimes too generous. That is how you ended up here. But this family has a name in this city, and I intend to protect it." Meredith nodded and said nothing. That was the first of 10 years of nodding and saying nothing. Phyllis reminded her, repeatedly, and in front of whoever happened to be in the room, that Meredith's presence in the family was a charity arrangement. That she should be grateful, that she should not have opinions about how things were done, that her background, The group home, the borrowed dress, the scholarship, was something to be ashamed of, not proud of, and the best she could do was not bring it up. Garrison watched these conversations happen, and at first intervened occasionally. By the third year he had stopped. By the fifth, he was sometimes the one who started them. Meredith cooked, managed the household, handled the school runs for their daughter Chloe, visited Lionel when his health required it, and went to the office and outperformed every senior executive on the floor. She did all of it. She told herself she was building something real. That patience was a form of strength, that the version of Garrison she had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere. She told herself that for a long time. On the morning of Chloe's 7th birthday, Meredith got up at 5 to make blueberry pancakes, with too much butter and a little sugar in the batter, the way Chloe always asked for them. She was standing at the stove when she heard Garrison come down the stairs, grab his travel mug, and leave without a word. He was flying to Houston for 2 days. He didn't say goodbye to Chloe, who was still asleep. He didn't mention the birthday. Lionel called at 7:30. His voice was a little slower these days, and he sometimes lost words, but he always found them again. "Tell that girl of mine happy birthday," he said. "Tell her to come see me this afternoon." Meredith stood at the kitchen window with the phone against her ear, watching the backyard where the light was just coming through the oak trees, and said, "Thank you, Lionel." Her throat was tight. He was quiet for a moment. "You're doing too much," he said. "I see it. I know you think you're holding things together, but a person can only hold for so long." He paused. "I'm making arrangements. I need more time, but I'm making them. Just hold on a little longer." She thought he was speaking out of general concern. She didn't ask what he meant. That afternoon, Chloe climbed up beside Lionel in his armchair and showed him the drawing she'd made at school. A yellow house, 3 figures holding hands, a big sun in the corner. "That's you and me and Mommy," Chloe said, pointing. "And that's a dog. We don't have a dog, but I want one." Lionel looked at the 3 figures for a moment. "Where's your daddy?" Chloe looked down at the drawing, then at her hands. "I kept trying to draw him, but his face kept coming out wrong. He always looks mad in my pictures, so I left it." She said it the way children say true things, without drama, just as a fact that had become familiar. Meredith folded the drawing carefully into her bag on the way home. Garrison came back from Houston 2 days later. He had not thought about the birthday. When Chloe mentioned it at dinner, trying to show him the drawing, he told her to finish her food and asked why her reading scores were still below grade level. Chloe put the drawing in her lap and went quiet. Meredith said his name once, a warning. He turned on her. She had embarrassed him at a client dinner 2 weeks earlier by correcting his account of a deal timeline in front of everyone. She had no idea how to read a room. Everything she did was calculated to undermine him. Chloe asked to be excused. Meredith nodded, and the little girl took her plate to the kitchen and didn't come back. Garrison kept talking. Meredith sat and looked at the table. Later, when the house was quiet, she went to check on Chloe. The little girl was in her bed with the drawing tucked under her pillow. She had added something to it after dinner, a small figure, sitting separate from the 3 holding hands. Inside the figure, she had written one word, Dad. Lionel collapsed at a routine appointment 6 months after the board meeting. He survived, but the damage was significant. Before he left the hospital, he had a long meeting with his attorney. Garrison found out about it from Phyllis, who had been listening outside the door. She came to Garrison's study that night, with her hands tight at her sides. "He's rewriting the succession documents," she said, "and the estate plan. He said your name once, and the rest of the time he said Meredith." Garrison looked at his mother. "Everything your father built," Phyllis said. "He's going to give it to a woman who came into this family with nothing. Who owes everything she has to our name? Are you going to let that happen?" Garrison didn't answer right away. He sat in his chair and looked at the glass of bourbon in his hand for a long time. Then he said no. That was the beginning. What happened over the next 8 months was methodical. Garrison was not impulsive. He made lists. He had worked alongside executives for 9 years and understood how financial records could be constructed to tell a story that wasn't true, and how a person's reputation could be dismantled before they had time to defend it. The scheme he built with his assistant Ozzy was straightforward. 3 fraudulent wire transfers totaling just over $200,000, routed from a vendor account into a personal account, opened in Meredith's name using her identifying information. An anonymous complaint filed with both the company's compliance board and the state's financial oversight office. a timed leak to a journalist who covered the real estate sector. On the morning the story broke, Meredith was getting Chloe ready for school. Her phone started ringing before she had finished her coffee and didn't stop. She was 6 weeks pregnant. She had found out 3 days earlier and hadn't told Garrison. She had been waiting for the right moment, hoping for something she couldn't quite name. She sat across from 2 investigators in a glass-walled conference room and answered every question in a steady voice. She did not know the vendor. She had not opened that account. She had not authorized any of the transfers. Garrison had already hired a separate attorney to file for an emergency custody hearing, arguing that a parent, under financial investigation, posed an instability risk to a minor child. He had also contacted 3 family law firms in Dallas and made clear, through intermediaries, that taking Meredith's case would create difficulties for their future dealings with Hargrove Development. All 3 declined within 48 hours. Meredith found a 4th attorney through Cameron, the woman she had grown up alongside in the group home, 2 years her senior, now an investigative journalist based in Austin. When Cameron heard what was happening, she drove to Dallas that night. She parked outside the building where they were holding Meredith for questioning and waited 3 hours in her car. "Tell me everything," Cameron said when Meredith came out. Meredith sat in the passenger seat and did. Garrison also had a new interest, and he was not hiding it. Her name was Roxanne. She was the principal behind a private equity group that had recently moved into Texas commercial real estate. Polished, wealthy, and interested in the power Garrison represented rather than the man he actually was. He told himself it was different from what people would assume. He was seen with her at events. He stopped being careful. Meredith found out the way people usually find out, not through a confrontation, but through an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she was crossing the lobby of a hotel where she had a meeting, and the elevator opened, and Garrison stepped out with his hand low on the back of a woman she recognized from a trade publication. She waited until he came back through the lobby alone and stepped in front of him. He told her it was business. She looked at him for a long moment, then she told him she was pregnant. He didn't speak for 4 seconds. Then he laughed, not unkindly, which was almost worse. He said she had always been good at timing. He said it changed nothing. He said she needed to figure out what she was going to do. Because he had already figured out what he was going to do. And it didn't include another child she would use to keep him in place. Meredith drove home. She sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before she went inside. She miscarried at 15 weeks, in her attorney's office, during a review of evidence. It happened quietly, the way some of the worst things do. When Garrison came to the hospital, he waited in the lobby for 11 minutes, then left. 2 weeks after she was released, he came to the house with a folder. Divorce papers. A share transfer agreement covering her stake in Hargrove Development, a stake Lionel had quietly signed over to her 18 months earlier, which Garrison now wanted back. He didn't sit down. "Chloe is with me," he said. "Right now, you're facing a financial fraud charge. My attorney has already spoken to the school. It won't take long before the other parents know, before the kids know. She's 7. She'll carry this for years." Meredith sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the folder. "Sign these," Garrison said, "and I pull the complaint. You get out and Chloe gets a clean life." He set a pen on top of the papers. "Or don't, and we see how long you can do this." She thought about Chloe sitting alone at a lunch table. She thought about the drawing of the horse and the cake her daughter had sent to the hospital. She picked up the pen. At the last page, she looked up at him. "You know I didn't take that money." He didn't answer. She kept her eyes on his face. "And you know that I know that." Garrison took the folder and walked out. 2 months later, Cameron called from a number Meredith didn't recognize. Her voice was compressed, the way it got when she was watching something, and didn't want to speak above a whisper. "He's not done with you," Cameron said. "Ozzy has been making calls to a private contractor in Fort Worth. I can't hear what they're saying, but I know who this contractor works for. Meredith, don't use your car tonight. Stay somewhere else." Meredith looked at her keys on the counter. "Where are you?" "Following someone. I'll call you in an hour." The call didn't come in an hour. Cameron had borrowed Meredith's car that evening because her own had been in the shop. She took Meredith's keys from the kitchen counter on her way out, leaving a note. "Back by 10, don't wait up." On a 2-lane highway outside the city, the brakes on the sedan stopped responding. The car went through a guardrail and down an embankment and caught fire on impact. The ID in the glove box, the emergency contact card in the visor, the registration, all of it pointed to Meredith. A state trooper called at 8:53. Meredith drove to the scene in Cameron's rental and stood at the edge of the road and looked at the guardrail torn open and the orange light still moving in the dark below, and she understood everything at once. The car was supposed to be hers. Garrison had sent someone, and Cameron, who had spent 6 months sleeping on Meredith's couch and eating peanut butter crackers and typing through the night, trying to build a case that could save her, had died in her place. Meredith sat down on the asphalt at the edge of the road and stayed there until the fire went out. A man named Flynn found her before the formal identification was made. He worked in private security, contracted by a firm building a separate case against Garrison over a stolen business deal. His people had been watching Ozzy. He had surveillance footage, taken the previous night, of a man in Garrison's employ lying beneath Meredith's car in the parking lot of her apartment complex. He showed her the footage on a tablet in the back of a dark SUV parked a quarter mile from the scene. "Your car was the target," he said. "We thought it was a tracker. We were wrong." "Does Garrison know I wasn't in that car?" Meredith said. "Not yet. The fire made it complicated. The ID is yours. They'll assume it's you until the process corrects it." "How long does that take?" "A few days, maybe a week." Meredith sat still. Then she said, "Let him assume it." She was gone before the correction became public. Flynn's employer arranged papers for a woman named Avery Cole. A real background, real credentials. A career in project development and investment advisory that would hold up to checking. Meredith spent 8 months outside Dallas. She recovered her health, and then she rebuilt herself in ways Garrison would not recognize. Shorter hair, a different way of moving through a room. She learned to sign with her left hand. She had always been right-handed. She practiced until it stopped feeling like practice. She also spent 3 hours a day studying Hargrove Development's current financial state. Garrison had made bad decisions. The company was bleeding slowly, and no one inside it could see it clearly yet. When she walked back into Dallas as Avery Cole, representing a regional advisory firm with real capital, she attended a commercial real estate forum at a hotel downtown. Garrison was there. He stopped when he saw her across the room. He stood very still, holding his drink, and she watched the color shift in his face, the way someone looks when they drive past a house they burn down and find it still standing. She crossed the room first and extended her left hand. "Avery Cole," she said. "I've heard of Hargrove Development. It's solid work." He shook her hand, said his name, and she watched him decide she was a coincidence, that what he was feeling was only the guilt of a man who had gotten away with something. People found lookalikes all the time. The dead stayed dead. He had stood at her funeral himself. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said. "I get that sometimes," Avery said. "I hope she was decent." What followed took 6 more months. Avery positioned her firm as the solution to Hargrove Development's growing debt. Garrison needed capital. She offered it conditionally: full access to the books, an office on the executive floor, an advisory seat. He agreed faster than she expected. She spent her first week back in the building learning what had changed and what hadn't. She walked the floor where she had once signed major contracts and been passed over in meetings. She sat at the side of tables where she had once sat at the head and watched what 9 years of Garrison's management had produced. The first time she came to the Hargrove house for a business dinner, and Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs, thin and careful in the way children become careful when the adults around them are unpredictable. Meredith had to set down her glass and breathe through her nose for 5 full seconds. Chloe looked at her from across the room with the specific focus children have when something almost familiar passes through their field of vision. "You look like someone," Chloe said. "Just that." Everyone at the table laughed. Garrison told her to go upstairs and finish her homework. 3 weeks later, Meredith was alone in the hall outside Lionel's old study. When Chloe appeared from around a corner, they looked at each other. "You were humming in the kitchen," Chloe said quietly. "When you thought no one was there, that's my song. Mom made it up. Nobody else knows it." Meredith had not realized she was humming. It was the small private melody she had invented the week Chloe was born, sung every night at bedtime for 6 years. She knelt down to Chloe's eye level. "Can you keep a secret?" Meredith said. Chloe held out her pinky finger without hesitating. The final piece of evidence was a recording. Lionel, before his condition had worsened, had kept a small digital recorder in his desk drawer, used to dictate notes for his attorney when writing became difficult. Through Chloe, who still knew where all of Lionel's hiding places were, Meredith had retrieved it. On it was a 14-minute dictation from 3 years earlier, in which Lionel described in clear detail his reasons for choosing Meredith as his successor. He described Garrison's behavior. He named Ozzy. He said, plainly, that if anything happened to him before his documents were finalized, he wanted the recording to stand as a record of his intent. He had made it the week before his first collapse. Flynn had the surveillance file. Cameron's editor in Austin had her research notes, backed up off-site before her death. Ozzy had been quietly fired by Garrison 6 months earlier, was facing his own legal exposure, and had hired a criminal defense attorney who was now in conversation with investigators. The last piece was Garrison's own words. She got them the way she had planned: a private dinner, a prenuptial and investment agreement his lawyers had reviewed and approved, a property outside Dallas where his security team found nothing because the device was on her. Bourbon, a question framed carefully enough that his pride answered before his judgment could. He told her about the wire transfers, about Ozzy building the account, about the share transfer, about the car. He said, "She died on that highway because I needed her gone. She wouldn't have stopped otherwise." He said it the way someone describes a business decision that was difficult but necessary. Meredith pressed her left hand flat against the table and looked at him. "Thank you," she said, "for being honest." The event Garrison had planned as a celebration. A major partnership announcement, 300 guests, business press, cameras, became something else entirely when Meredith walked to the podium in white and said the name she had buried 18 months before. Her own name. She played the recording. She displayed Flynn's footage. She read from Lionel's dictation while the room held its breath. Garrison tried to speak. He looked at the cameras, then at the exits, then at the investigators who had been positioned around the room's perimeter for the last 40 minutes. They walked him out in handcuffs. Meredith watched from the stage. She felt no triumph. She felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down, and is only now realizing how much their body had adapted to the weight. Roxanne left before the handcuffs went on. Phyllis sat in the front row with her hands in her lap and did not move for a long time. When Meredith stepped down from the stage and past her, Phyllis looked up. Whatever she had intended to say, she didn't say it. She looked at the woman she had spent a decade calling an outsider and found she had nothing left. Meredith kept walking. In the months that followed, the record was corrected. The fraud conviction was vacated. The coerced share transfer was voided. The Hargrove Development Board voted unanimously to restore Meredith to the position Lionel had always intended for her. She took it. In her first week back, she had Lionel's name placed permanently on the lobby wall alongside the company's founding date. Garrison was tried on charges related to Cameron's death, the fraud scheme, and the conspiracy to coerce a signature under duress. He was convicted on all counts. The judge imposed a minimum of 30 years. Phyllis faced separate charges for her role in suppressing evidence. Because of her age and declining health, she received a supervised sentence and a restitution order. The estate was sold to pay debts. On a Saturday in early spring, Meredith picked Chloe up from art class, and they drove to a farmer's market on the edge of the city. Chloe held her hand the whole way and narrated everything: the dog she spotted near the bread stall, the flavor of the popsicle she wanted, the fact that her teacher had put her drawing on the board for the 3rd week in a row. "She said I have an eye for composition," Chloe said, trying out the phrase carefully. "You do," Meredith said. "What does that mean?" "It means you see where things belong." Chloe thought about this while eating her popsicle. Then she looked up. "Mom, can we get a dog now?" "Maybe. You've been saying maybe for a year." "That's true." Chloe tightened her grip on her mother's hand and leaned slightly against her arm as they walked. The way she had started doing again in the last few months, that small, unconscious lean that meant she was not afraid of being too close. That evening, Meredith opened the small wooden box she had carried since she was 18. She took out the old cocktail napkin, soft with age now, faded at the folds. She held it for a while in the lamplight. The version of Garrison she had loved had never fully existed. She understood that now. Not with bitterness, exactly, but with the particular clarity that comes after bitterness is finally finished with you. She had fallen in love with a single gesture and spent years trying to build a person out of it. That person had been gone long before the rest of it happened. Probably longer than she would ever know. She folded the napkin one final time and placed it back in the box. Not to throw away, not to keep for the wrong reasons, just to let it remain what it had always really been, a relic of a girl who had nothing and needed something to hold, and held it faithfully, and made it all the way through. Chloe called from the other room. Something about the dog. Something about dinner. Something about a drawing she wanted to show before it got too late. Meredith set the box down and went to her.